In the Karen Reed murder retrial, is the prosecution actually tanking their own case by the witnesses they are calling? And a couple of unexpected things revealed this past week. Hey, we're going to talk about that and a whole lot more on this episode of Charlie Crimebuster. It is what some people are calling, well, they're calling it the fastest minutes in podcasting.
The following presentation is brought to you by PeacemakerNetwork.com. PeacemakerNetwork.com. All of our music and sound effects are provided by our friends and contributors to Pixabay.com. Pixabay.com. The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are solely those of the individuals interviewed or participating and do not represent those of Charlie Crimebuster nor Peacemaker Network. All individuals described or mentioned in the presentation should be considered innocent unless or until found guilty in a court of law. The following presentation is for mature audiences. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
Well, we're going to get you caught up on the Karen Reed murder retrial for sure in this fourth week. But first, let me take a moment to welcome you to the podcast. As I've said often, the thousands of downloads humble us, and we're grateful for every single person who boards the Charlie Crime train. Hey, if you're a seasoned listener or you're a new listener, I'd like to invite you to reach out with a shout out. You can reach me, charliecrimebuster at gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster at gmail.com. Hey, don't forget to check out our sponsor. That's peacemakernetwork.com. You can read about the brave men and women who put their life on the line to keep you and I safe and secure. We are talking about law enforcement, first responders, and the brave men and women of the military. Read all about it, peacemakernetwork.com. You can even become a part by becoming a badge, BADGE supporter. Tell you all about that, peacemakernetwork.com. If you'd like to get caught up on all the episodes, we have hundreds of them out there, we'd invite you to go to charliecrimebuster.com or just jump right over to YouTube and slash it, whichever way you want to. Just connect it to Charlie Crimebuster at YouTube. You'll find a whole bunch of stuff there for you to, as James Buckland, our producer, says, you can binge-cast it. Yep, you can binge-cast it. Just check out the YouTube channel, Charlie Crimebuster. By the way, if you reach out with a shout-out, you can ask questions. You can make suggestions about other crimes you'd like for us to cover. You can even object. It is safe for you to disagree. In fact, we like to hear people who disagree because it gives us an opportunity to think back through what we've said and might even change your mind. Who knows? So reach out with that shout out, charliecrimebuster at gmail.com. Well, this was the fourth week of the murder retrial of Karen Reed. Now, for those of us who have followed and reported on the first trial, you would expect much the same thing. But there are some differences in this trial for sure. And in week 4, we found 2 unexpected things that was revealed. Now, for those of you who have been raised in the part of the United States where there is snow, unlike those who are raised here in Florida, where I'm at this point, it is always an exciting time when school was canceled because of snow. However, we did not expect court to be canceled on this one day in the week of trial week number 4. And it wasn't snow. Nope, wasn't snow. After 4 weeks of witnesses, sidebars, and evidence presentations, on Tuesday, well, the court was stunned to hear proceedings would not happen. And that was due to, quote, unquote, unavoidable circumstances. Now, it has been reported, or I guess I could say speculated, that it was because Karen Reed was ill and could not attend the court. Obviously, the court would not announce that because of HIPAA laws. But for whatever reason, the court was canceled in the Karen Reed murder trial this past Tuesday. Then there was a second unexpected thing that occurred. We'll get to that shortly. However, the court did take place on Monday of last week as Massachusetts State Police Sergeant Yuri Buchanan was on the stand for his third full day. I can't imagine facing Alan Jackson for 3 days on the stand. Now, I faced some pretty tough defense lawyers in my own day on the stand as a police officer, but this guy, he faced probably one of the best defense attorneys in the nation for 3 straight days as he was cross-examined. Now keep in mind that the good sergeant mechanic is the witness for the prosecution. And it appears to me, well, that the prosecution is using the sergeant to deal with what I've called in this trial the Proctor factor. And the Proctor factor is all over this case. Proctor, of course, was the lead investigator in the case. He was fired because of the way that he handled himself in the case. And let me just take a moment to say something here for you that have been following the trial. The way the prosecution, and particularly the good sergeant mechanic, is trying to use the words case manager to take away from the words lead investigator, well, my friend, I don't think it's fooling anyone. And I'm sure the jury by now has picked up on the fact that Proctor was indeed the lead investigator in this case, no matter how many times the prosecution and the good sergeant tries to stick to the phrase case manager in place of lead investigator. And you know, while the good sergeant may be the prosecution's way to get around calling Michael Proctor, who was fired, by the way, again, by the way he handled the case, it also opened up the sergeant for intense, well-thought-out cross-examination from Alan Jackson. You see, Jackson was able to use the sergeant to introduce into the case the so-called inverted video. You remember that? That was the one the prosecution used in the first trial and got embarrassed when the defense pointed out it was inverted. Yep, turned right around opposite, trying to show the jury one side when actually it should have been showing him the other side. You see, there was the idea and the concept that the prosecution was attempting to fool the jury. And to get around that fact, well, Trooper Proctor, you see, he was seen on the video hanging around the so-called broken taillight of Karen Reed's vehicle as it was in the Canton Police Department vehicle bay. And remember now, the defense is planting the seed that, well, that Proctor, the lead investigator, planted evidence in the case. And whether it's true or not that he planted evidence in the case, it does play into the defense hands that he had the opportunity to do so. You see, this is what I mean by the fact of the intro I mentioned is the prosecution tanking their own case. You see, so far the prosecution is making some headway, and I think better headway than in the first case. It appears, though, that each witness the state calls end up in some fashion or other bolstering the defense plan of planting reasonable doubt in the minds of the jury. Sergeant Buchanan was beat up continuously. No pun intended when we think about the fact the defense says that John was beat up rather than hit by the car. Well, I can tell you one thing for sure. This sergeant on cross-examination mentally is beat up. And he just did not help himself from just not acknowledging some of the graphic mistakes the investigation made. And instead of admitting that and saying it did not affect the evidence, he turns around and spends so much time trying to defend the mistakes of the investigation that it really makes him look bad. He would have been far more effective if he would just admit the errors. No investigation is perfect. And then simply state that those errors did not change the main evidence against Karen Reed. But oh no, he had to stand toe-to-toe, and he just would not give in. And I think one of the most embarrassing times on stand for Sergeant, well, in my mind, it was after Jackson proved that Proctor was extremely inappropriate in his actions and his behavior in the case. It was evident to all that was watching, and no doubt the jury, that Proctor was by far a cancer on this case. Yet, the good sergeant, mechanic, continued to uphold that Proctor was an excellent investigator with integrity. Did you hear that? With integrity. Now, here's the problem with that. If he defines integrity by the actions of Proctor, the lead investigator, well, that impacts upon his own integrity to the jury. And it did not help that it was revealed to the jury that the sergeant himself was disciplined by the state police by the way he supervised Proctor. By the way, my friend, there's an old Kenny Rogers song that says, "You gotta know when to fold 'em." My friend, this witness did not know when to fold them. While he was called as a witness for the prosecution, I'm afraid he did much more to bolster the defense claim that the investigation was sloppy. And if that impacts the jury in reasonable doubt, it could mean trouble for this prosecution. Now, in addition to Sergeant being back on the stand for his third day this week, there was a second unexpected thing that happened. And we're going to get to that in just a moment, but now it's time for us to take a break, take a deep breath, and for me to share with you Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. Now, my friend, we've said a lot about crazy crooks in America. We've said far too much about crazy crooks in Florida. Just Google Florida, man, and you got all kinds of stories, right? But my friend, I want you to know, these guys come from Georgia. Yep, Georgia, not Florida, but Georgia. And these two would-be criminal masterminds, well, they were robbing gaming systems. By the way, those can be quite expensive. And they were robbing them from an unnamed store there in Gwinnett County, Georgia. And responding officers were told that they fled. And here's something that people are talking about today. They were fled in a Tesla. Yep, a Tesla. They put out the description for fellow cops. And you know what happened? These crazy crooks, well, they were located not too far from the crime scene. And they were located at a place where they were charging the electric car. Police did say they recovered the gaming systems along with several guns and what they believe was 2 pounds of marijuana. Now, the suspects were not identified in this tweet that applauded the works of the officers of the county police department. But just let me say, my friend, if you're going to rob and steal and you're going to do it in an electric car, well, just maybe, you ought to make sure it's charged up for your getaway, lest you get caught charging it up just a few miles from the site of the crime. But my friend, these two idiots who tried to rob something and steal something in an electric car that wasn't charged, they are indeed Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crooks of the Week. Now back to our main focus. The prosecution's use of witnesses appears to be backfiring on them in that the prosecution, well, they're bringing these witnesses and yet the defense is making some hay off of the witnesses. Now, the defense also used the good sergeant to introduce a second unexpected piece of evidence. They were able, through him, to introduce a video that was new to the trial, videos that was brand new to the trial. We didn't see this in the first trial. They were able to point out that Brian Higgins, the ATF agent that was in the house that night and that is now beginning to appear through the defense as a third-party suspect, well, they were able to introduce the flirtatious text with the defendant and Higgins. We talked about that last week. But they were also able to introduce a video showing Higgins at the Canton Police Department in the early morning hours of January the 29th, that same day old Keith was killed. Now, while some are wondering what this means, it's very apparent that he was on his phone talking to someone. And my friend, remember the back and forth about those butt dials between his phone and the owner of the house there where old Keith was found on the lawn? They said they were simply butt dials? Well, there's no doubt about it. In this video, he's not making butt dials. He's talking on the phone. And so, again, is the prosecution tanking their own case by the witnesses that they're calling? Certainly, the defense is making hay with the prosecution's witnesses. Now, after Monday, that was when the sergeant was on the stand, the court went dark because of that canceled day we mentioned earlier. That was followed up the following day with a testimony from John's niece. Now, in order to protect the juvenile's privacy, the judge ordered news cameras not to record her testimony. But they did reserve space for 10 reporters in the courtroom and were able to determine what the testimony was all about because of these reporters that were inside the courtroom. Now, a New England radio host said that the niece could not hide her animosity toward Karen. The things she said, according to him, was significant. There was a lot of fighting in December and January between the defendant, Karen Reed, and John O'Keefe, and that fighting seemed to increase. You see, this aligns with the same argument that Reed allegedly picked arguments with O'Keefe after a New Year's trip to Aruba. You see, there she accused O'Keefe of cheating on her with a friend's sister. Something, by the way, that O'Keefe denied, according to his niece. Now, on more than one occasion they fought, and the niece said that John said to Reed, "Why don't you just go home?" And the niece said she wouldn't leave the house. She also testified that a frantic Reed woke her up between 4:30 and 5 a.m. on that day of January the 29th. And that Reed wanted phone numbers for O'Keefe's friends, Carrie Roberts and Jennifer McCabe, who Cabe was at Reed there. And, of course, they were there with Reed when she discovered the body. Now, the niece allegedly overheard her asking whether she could have done something. Maybe he was hit by a snowplow. You know, I don't know that this really damaged the defense case a whole lot because the defense was able to come back and talk about good times that she had with Karen while Karen was there with O'Keefe. But it does appear that she told it like it was. And it does appear that it does add to the fact that there was trouble in paradise, that there was trouble with the relationship. But yet, the defense was able to come back and have even this witness verify that there was no evidence of physical violence. Now, I was going to say the defense was not able to use this witness to bolster their case, but maybe the fact that there was no physical violence might help the defense. Because we can see clearly that the investigators, they want to present this as domestic violence, as a domestic violence case where Karen hit her boyfriend with a car that night. But yet again, the niece, while confirming there was problem in Karen and John's relationship, confirmed there was no physical violence, let alone murder. So again, I got to ask you, is the prosecution unknowingly tanking its own case? Now, jurors at Karen Reed's murder trial, they heard also key testimony during this past week about microscopic pieces of evidence recovered from the crime scene where O'Keefe's body was found there outside of that other Boston cop's home in January of 2022. Ashley Valier, a forensic scientist at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab, she talked about her analysis of debris that was covered from O'Keefe's clothing. It included dirt, tiny pieces of plastic. But yet, this scientist said she never saw the clothing itself. And keep in mind that the defense is making hay with how this evidence was gathered. Can you say red Solo cups? Can you say leaf blower? And there was another expert who testified about DNA evidence found on Reed's taillight, and that O'Keefe's clothing, and talked about a drinking glass found near the body. But even these so-called slam dunks for the prosecution, well, the defense again is able to get traction, again pointing to the way that this evidence was collected, pointing to the way that there was a lead investigator who had a bias, it appears, from the very go against Karen Reed. Talks about the red Solo cups again, a leaf blower again. Can you imagine using a leaf blower to gather evidence, even if it's in the snow? A leaf blower? Come on, folks. This was an unprotected crime scene. And all these things are being used to discredit the findings from these experts. And yet, my friend, then comes what I think is the most damaging prosecution witness to the stand up to this point. And that, my friend, was the medical examiner that was called this past week. Dr. Socorro Bello, well, she held strong. She held strong to the fact, well, that the cause of his death was blunt force trauma to the head and hypothermia, but that the manner of death was undetermined. I think this is huge for the defense. If the medical examiner can't really figure out how he died, what makes you think that the jury can figure it out without probable doubt? And the prosecution failed to move the medical examiner, even though they had told the examiner that their investigation told them that Karen had hit O'Keefe with her car. In fact, she ends up testifying when she's brought back to the defense and cross-examined. She's saying, well, that the injuries she saw on Keith may not be consistent with being hit by a car. Now, she did say that the injury could be consistent to him hitting the back of his head on the frozen ground, but she would not move in the fact that according to her scientific investigation as a trained medical examiner, that the manner of death is undetermined. Now, she also, I got to say, held hold to her findings of hypothermia, even though the defense attempted to poke holes in their finding. You see, they're saying that he was killed and brought out and died in the snow, and that it wasn't the hypothermia that killed him, but he was dead before then. When it gets down to the medical examiner, I got to say, folks, in my opinion, this expert witness helped the defense more than they helped the prosecution, even though she was called by the prosecution. Now, even though, and this was pointed out on the stand, she had 90 days after her findings to amend her findings. And she knew all about Karen's alcohol level. She learned about the tail light that was broken, and she learned about all this other stuff. And yet after 90 days and all this other stuff coming in, she still would not change her findings, even though she could have adjusted them, even though she could have amended them, which proves that she's not convinced, without a shadow of a doubt, that O'Keefe's injuries came from being hit by a vehicle. I think that's going to be huge in this case. And now we know the prosecution's case is winding down on their part. And this actually, I believe, sets it up for the arc of witnesses that we know the defense will add to the fact that they see that it is no way that his injuries was caused by a vehicle striking him. Now, rest assured, the prosecution will have a stronger witness, and I believe we're going to hear from him this next week. A stronger witness that we're going to hear from. We also know that he plans to call a neurosurgeon who no doubt will testify about the injury to the back of O'Keefe's head. However, even with this, the defense used the medical examiner to already discount the testimony of the neurosurgeon by stating that the neurosurgeon does not have the training that the medical examiner has to determine the manner of death. And the manner of death? Undetermined. But the question is, will this lead the jury to reasonable doubt with all the other evidence that the prosecution is submitting? Well, the week ended with the jury not being present. And then there was another battle of the lawyers that took place outside the jury. That's right, a battle of the lawyers that took place outside of the jury. And we're going to tell you about that, but before that, there was something else that took place outside the jury. You see, the Judge Cannon, she lifted the buffer zone that had been in place outside the Norfolk Superior Courthouse. Now, you've probably wondered why, in this case, you're not hearing and seeing on the news all of those people out there with their signs yelling, "Free Karen Reed, keep free Karen Reed." You see, this came about after the first trial, because then the judge said there's going to be a buffer zone in this next trial. However, the Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that her buffer zone that she had set violated Reed supporters' First Amendment rights. So while now there are rules to keep Karen supporters from yelling at the jury and to stay on sidewalks and in the streets, you're probably going to see them more present next week because they're going to be much closer to the court, and they're probably going to be picked up on a lot of the news media. And they're probably going to get a little bit galvanized by this ruling where the judge has had to say, I'm going to take back this 200 feet buffer zone. You're going to be able to get closer. So I think this next week we may hear more from Reed supporters. But now, let's go back to the battle of the lawyers. Next week, I believe we're going to start seeing in the next coming weeks what I call the battle of the experts. I'm calling that for the next couple of weeks, the battle of the experts, and it'll mostly center around the vehicle and questions if the vehicle hit John O'Keefe and ended up taking his life. But now the battle of the lawyers. You see, the judge ruled against Karen Reed's defense team regarding some data evidence that's going to come in about the vehicle. And now the Commonwealth can introduce new evidence from another data company regarding the variance of the internal clock in Karen Reed's luxury SUV and John O'Keefe's phone. Now the defense attorney, Alessi, he argued that the amended report was not timely and it was an ambush. He suggested the witnesses may have even violated the sequestering order by watching testimony from the trial. And he asked the court not to allow the report to be used, or at least for a continuance of 4 days, to review the Commonwealth's experts' new findings. He went on to say there's no remedy for the defense. We will not be able to recover strategically from it. That's what he said. But, well, the judge ruled against that. So next week, we're going to be presented with some new stuff from new experts from the prosecution. So it's going to be interesting to see what that is and if that will help the prosecution. Maybe, because of next week, we'll not be saying, is the prosecution tanking its own case? So far, the defense has made headway with the reasonable doubt part of most of the prosecution's witnesses. And this is what I am finding that most people are thinking. Most people who are following this trial are saying that there is still a lot of reasonable doubt there. However, we have no way of knowing how the jury is thinking. They do not get this fire hose blast of information that all of us are getting about the trial. So while we may be thinking this, is this what the jury is thinking? That's what is going to really count, isn't it? So, my friends, stay tuned now next week for what I think we're going to start seeing, the battle of the experts in Karen Reed's trial. And yours truly, Charlie Crimebuster, we're going to be here to keep you updated. James Buckland and I are going to join on in the middle of the week with our YouTube channel, and we're going to keep you updated, and we're going to keep you on the mark in this, the retrial of the century. So, my friend, until this time next time, this is Charlie Crimebuster, reminding you, be safe, be alert, for the life you save may be your very own.
Thank you, Charlie. We'd like to thank our sponsor, the PeacemakerNetwork.com. That's PeacemakerNetwork.com. Also, all of our music and sound effects are provided by our friends and contributors to Pixabay.com. They're responsible for making our podcast more enjoyable. That's Pixabay.com. And if you're a true crime junkie, we'd like to encourage you to binge-cast by listening to our podcast located on many popular podcast platforms. Simply search for Charlie Crimebuster, or say to your smart speaker, play Charlie Crimebuster. Regardless of your podcast platform preference, and you have enjoyed our show, please subscribe or click the like button. And finally, here at Charlie Crimebuster, we welcome comments, suggestions, opinions, and whether you agree or disagree with our view on a topic, we still want to hear from you. So reach out with a shout-out. Email Charlie at charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Or you can call or text us at 407-917-2211. That's 407-917-2211. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you will join us again for another exciting crime episode with Charlie Crimebuster.